Hello everyone and welcome to my talk, All Roads Lead to OpenVPN, Pwn'ing Industrial Remote Access Clients. My name is Sharon Brizinov and I work at Claroty, and in this talk I will describe and tell you a story behind the research we've conducted in our research department in Claroty. So let's start quickly with who am I. So as I said, my name is Sharon Brizinov. I'm a vulnerability research team lead at Claroty, and my main focus area of research is ICS cybersecurity. And as you can see here, our lab, we have a lot of ICS related equipment with PLCs, HMIs, engineering working stations. We have all different kind of sensors and field devices that we're playing with. That's why we love to call it a playground. But the official name is our lab. So let's start with the agenda for today. So first of all, I'm going to tell you the story behind this research. Then we'll go over quickly and we'll describe what is industrial OT networks. Then we're going to discuss what are remote access solutions and what's the relation to OpenVPN and what are the design flows that we found in how remote access solutions are implementing OpenVPN, and why and how we abused and exploited this fact to gain a couple of vulnerabilities and CVs. So with that, let's start with our story time. So, 2020, as you all know, the coronavirus, the corona pandemic broke out around the world, and people started to work from home. So, WFH, work from home, became very popular, but people still needed to work somehow. So, working places started to use VPNs, and VPNs, as you know, allow people to connect remotely to other networks. So it's a virtual private network that allows, in this case, employees to connect to their working place without being physical and on site. And we, as a cybersecurity firm, and other researchers and also attackers across the globe started to look into VPN solutions and remote access solutions to find vulnerabilities in. So many researchers started to discover vulnerabilities, and hackers started to exploit these vulnerabilities. And we too, in Clarity, started to research these products, and eventually we found a couple of vulnerabilities and we got our CVs. And when I'm discussing VPN, so usually in the industrial world, we're usually talking about an engineer so in this example we have here, let's call it Rachel the engineer, and she's working from home. It's Corona time, so her kids are home too, and you can see the baby on her hands, and she's trying to work, but from home. So she's trying to connect to the industrial network in the factory. And so her goal is to communicate with one of the devices in the network. In this example, it's a robotic arm that she's trying to control somehow. And for that, she needs to connect to the VPN. So she's using a VPN software on her computer, so on her private machine. And using this software, she is able to connect through a VPN tunnel to the network, and she's able to control the robotic arm. So our goal was, if we can find, since many researchers are trying to find vulnerability in the VPN servers, we tried to focus this time on Rachel's machine. So we tried to focus on the computer or the client side, and we poked different industrial remote access clients to find vulnerabilities in them. So that's the background on the research, or why we started it. And now let's talk a little bit about our domain field. So industrial OT networks. And let's start with this diagram or image from a factory. So as you can see here, it's a standard factory. We can see a conveyor belt here. So this conveyor belt is just uh, a belt that spins and used to move objects from one side of the plant or factory to the other side. And across this belt, there are a couple of sensors and actuators or motors that spins and tell belt how to spin. And what controls this entire belt and this entire mechanism is a device called PLC. And the PLC is the brain behind actually every machinery that you see in the industrial world. There are tons of different vendors of PLCs, and this is just an example I found online. But this PLC, what's important in it is that it runs logic, continuously running logic. So what happens is that the programmer writing logic to this PLC transfers the logic to this PLC. And the programmer is using something similar to IDE. So, for example, this is the IDE that the engineering is using, and the right terminology for this is engineering working station. So, using the engineering working station, they're writing logic, for example, how to read data from different sensors and how to command the different actuators and motors. So, the first step would be to program the logic that will be executed on the PLC, and then the PLC can run continuously this logic and control the sensors and actuators, for example, motors on the conveyor belt or other machinery to control it. So, for example, the PLC can receive data from the sensors that tells it the height of a certain box, and then based on the written logic, the PLC can decide how to change the actuators or the motors to drive this object across the conveyor belt. So this is the brain, and most of the industrial networks are built on these PLCs and this scheme of engineering working station and a PLC. And again, engineers are writing programs in the engineering working station, which is a Windows-based software, and through this software they're transferring the logic that will be executed on the PLC, and then the PLC is the one that controls the actual sensors and other field devices. And the goal of people that managing and writing programs to these PLCs and actually maintaining these PLCs is to connect to these PLCs. So they need connectivity to these PLCs, and they're doing this with remote access solutions when they're working from home. So this is a very basic scheme of how remote access solutions are working. Basically, you can see here the engineer working from home, and they need access. For this, in our example, we're using Rachel. Rachel needs access from her home to the factory where she can control the PLCs, HMIs, and other devices on the industrial network. And to do that, she's using a VPN service or a remote access solution. And it starts with a client on her computer, which connects through a cloud gateway to a physical embedded device on the network. And this hardware appliance actually has two network interfaces, one on the internet outside and one into the OT network. And then she has connectivity to the PLCs. She can write programs and change the logic on these PLCs or monitor these PLCs that will eventually control the actual field devices, for example, the robotic arm that we've discussed before. So she needs this connectivity to control the PLC, which controls the robotic arm. And this tunnel here, although it looks very simple, is actually not that simple. So in the modern days, we have a terminology called VPN, Virtual Private Network, which essentially creates a VPN tunnel between two places. So the remote client can communicate internally on the other side with a remote network. And it does this by encrypting the payload on the entrance to this tunnel. So this is the packet that we want to send to the other side. The VPN service will actually take this packet that we want to send, encrypt it, and then add a couple of more headers and then send it across the tunnel to the other side. Then it will be dissected and broken down. All these layers will be tiered off, and then the payload, our packet, will be sent internally on the network. And one of the most common solutions when we're talking about VPNs is OpenVPN, because this is a great open source implementation of a VPN protocol. So it consists of client and server applications. It consists of a dedicated protocol over UDP 1194, and it works. And this VPN, OpenVPN, and actually any other VPN application works as follows. So we have this application, which is not, it's completely unaware of the VPN secure tunnel, but it needs to send data to what it thinks is a nearby device. So in our example, Rachel is using this engineering working station to send data or to read data from a PLC which is actually remote on the remote location, but this application thinks that the PLC is nearby. And what actually happens behind the scene is this application tries to communicate with the PLC, and instead of the network packets directly reaching the PLC, what happens is the entire network traffic goes through a TAN 0, which is a virtual network interface. And this TAN 0, what it does is redirect the traffic through OpenVPN instance, in which the OpenVPN adds these layers of different headers and also encrypts the internal data. And then it sends it through the real interface. And now the packet here is encrypted and goes through the VPN tunnel. So OpenVPN is a great implementation for a VPN. It's very easy to use and highly configurable VPN system, and that's why many remote access solutions are not implementing the VPN protocol themselves, but they're using as a black box or out of the box the OpenVPN, which is a great implementation of the VPN, and it saves them a great amount of time. So I've recording using Wireshark session with OpenVPN, and as you can see here, I'm sending encrypted data, and everything is being sent encrypted through the VPN tunnel, and everything works as it should. So just to conclude, OpenVPN is a great standard and a great implementation of a VPN service, and remote access solutions, specifically in the industrial world, instead of creating their own VPN implementation, they're using OpenVPN out of the box, which saves them a great amount of time. So let's talk a little bit about the specific feature in OpenVPN, which we found kind of a problematic way to implement it. So this feature is called management interface. But before we're diving into what is an OpenVPN management interface, I want to raise an issue that remote access solution vendors, so software vendors, encountered. So the problem is that low privileged users need the ability to connect to the VPN tunnel. For example, Rachel, probably through the organization policy in her domain, is defined as a low privileged user. So even if her computer will get infected somehow by a malware, the malware will have no admin rights. But OpenVPN needs admin rights to head routes and configurations and to configure the virtual network interface and other configuration needed. And for this configuration, admin rights are needed for the process, so for the OpenVPN instance that is running. But Rachel is activating the tunnel, so Rachel decides when she wants to connect to her office network, and she is unprivileged user in her domain. So what happens is that low privileged users has no ability to use VPNs because they don't have admin rights to configure the different routes needed. And that's why OpenVPN understood this, and that's why they've created the OpenVPN management interface. And essentially, the OpenVPN management interface allows OpenVPN to be administratively controlled from an external program through a socket, a TCP socket. So it's an OpenVPN feature to programmatically control a running OpenVPN process through as a TCP socket. So basically, VPN OpenVPN process is running and is listening on one of the TCP ports and is waiting for a command such as start the VPN tunnel using this configuration, and then it reads the configuration and starts running. So if you want to understand better the scheme of entire remote access solution, you can consider this. So we have OpenVPN, which is initially started as a high privileged service. So when we're talking about Windows-based machines, usually the OpenVPN is configured to run as a service. I'm sorry, is configured to run with high privileges, and the OpenVPN instance is waiting using the management interface feature, is waiting for commands. So once it will receive a command, it will start and open the tunnel to the home office, which sits on the other side of the internet. So right now we have the host machine here. This is the host machine, and one of the processes running is OpenVPN, and it waits for a command. And what happens usually when we're talking about the remote access solutions is the following diagram. So we have, before the OpenVPN, we have a service. So this is a high privileged service that is also waiting for a command, because this is a service, a Windows service, and it receives a command when low privileged software is being opened by a low privileged user. And this low privileged user is starting the low privileged application, which is just a front end application. And the whole purpose of the front end application is to tell the service, again, through a TCP connection, TCP socket, tells the service, which is always running in the background, to start the OpenVPN instance. And the OpenVPN instance is always listening for a command to start the tunnel or to kill the tunnel. And it does it again through the management interface feature. And now we have this service, which runs the backend service, which runs with high privileges. And since it is the one that starts the OpenVPN process, it can control it using the management interface, and that's why and how low privileged user can start the entire chain just because of this cool feature that allows OpenVPN to wait for commands. And now, of course, we have low privileged user that can start VPN services. If we did not have this feature of OpenVPN management interface, we would have needed to be privileged users or admin users to start the OpenVPN instance. But this feature saves us the need for being administrators on the machines, and even low privileged users can start OpenVPN tunnels. So this is the basic scheme, and as you can see here, I've put a product logo just because we've seen this exact architecture or design layout of OpenVPN being controlled by a backend service, which is being controlled by a front-end application. We've seen this many times, and we found an issue with this. So now let's go on and describe the design flow that allowed us to find LPE and SSRF attacks, and eventually chain them up into one-click RC on the VPN client side on different applications. So let's discuss the flow. As we said before, we have the front-end application, which runs in the context of the user because the user is double-clicking the OpenVPN application. This application sends commands to a backend service, which runs always as a Windows service. And this Windows service waits for command, and it usually listens on a TCP socket. Once it receives the vendor management command, it will send a start tunnel or open tunnel to the VPN, which listens using the management interface feature for a command, and it will send this command to OpenVPN instance to start the secure tunnel. So here we have the management interface commands, and obviously OpenVPN will only accept the management interface commands, which are kind of something like start encrypted tunnel or use this configuration or something similar, but it will only accept specific keywords that were defined in the OpenVPN management interface protocol. And we have this second listener, which waits for vendor management commands. But what we found is in many cases, these commands are textual and very loose. So the backend service is not doing such a great job at checking what commands it tries to parse, and in many cases it will be very loose. So if it will receive a command that it did not understand, it will just ignore it and move on to the next command. So as you can see here, again, this is a very abstract design, but since we've seen this across many different vendors, specifically in the industrial automation world, but we've seen this design in many different vendors, so we decided to dig in and to think if we can find a vulnerability in this design, and we did find a way to exploit it. So we needed to find a way to inject commands into the backend from the outside world. And luckily we found a couple of protocols, for example HTTP, that are complete textual. So if you remember the HTTP RFC, this protocol is completely textual. And what we can do with the textual protocol, we can send the textual data to the backend service, which is very loose, and it will just ignore commands that it doesn't understand, and it will move on until it reaches a command that it does understand. So for example, if we can see here the HTTP request, we can see it consists of just text, so ASCII-based characters that are printable. And we can see it has a very defined structure. So for example, it has the first line get, and then the path, the method, and then the path, and then the version of the protocol, and then we have a couple of headers. And if we're sending a post message, a post HTTP method, eventually we will reach the data itself. So what we tried to achieve here is the following. We have this diagram again. So we have the front-end application, when we have the backend service, and we have the OpenVPN instance, which are all waiting for commands to start the OpenVPN tunnel. And we sent to one of our victims, we sent a malicious link to a malicious website. Once the user clicked on this link, we activated a malicious JS payload, which sent locally HTTP post request with our controlled data. So what we did is, once the user clicked on the link and went on and visited our malicious website, we actually sent locally to 127.0.0.1 on the required port of the backend, on the port that the backend is listening on. We sent HTTP post request message with our payload, and it just read all the different headers, ignored them, and finally when it reached our payload, it executed the payload and started the OpenVPN instance tunnel. So let's see from the logs how it looks like. So here we have an example of a very loose backend parser, and we can see here that the backend received a message which looks unfamiliar to him. So basically, it received our malicious JS HTTP request through the JS payload. And what it did, it just ignored this line and ignored this line and ignored this line and ignored the next line. So it ignored the entire HTTP payload until it ignored all the HTTP headers until it reached our payload, and our payload was start OpenVPN instance with this and that configuration, as you can see here in the process monitor. So what eventually happened is that the backend service started the OpenVPN service, and it started it with a certain configuration that told OpenVPN to start and open a tunnel, a secure tunnel. So because in many cases we encountered the backend service was very loose, we were able to exploit it using a malicious HTTP request with post data. But you may ask yourself, what about single origin policy and cross-origin resource sharing? So these terminologies exist to help clients not to be exploited by malicious websites. So what it means is, if I'm visiting example.com, and example.com, let's say it's a malicious website which has a fetch data from evil.com. The same origin policy will prevent, the browser will enforce the same origin policy which will prevent the web page from getting data from evil.com. It will not prevent the request itself. So the request of evil.com will be executed, but the browser itself will enforce the same origin policy and will not allow this page of example.com to read the response from evil.com. So if that's the case, the request goes on, but we can't receive the response, we don't care, because all we need is to send data to the localhost page. So in this example, to the localhost service, which is a backend service waiting for vendor-specific commands. So we don't care that this backend service doesn't return any response. We don't care that we can't even read these responses. We only care about sending this request, and we care about that our request will reach the backend service that could potentially parse the request and execute the vendor-specific command, which will start the OpenVPN chain. So we did not care at all about the response. We only care about the request, which SOAP does not prevent. So let's do a quick recap. What we have here is the same diagram that we've discussed before. And what we're doing is actually we're injecting commands to the backend service from HTTP payload through a browser in this case. So that's why our attacks are called one-click, because it only requires the victim to do a one-click on a link that we send him through WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever, and once the victim goes onto our website, we can start this OpenVPN chain. Okay, so you might ask yourself, okay, so we can start an OpenVPN tunnel. So what? So if we can control the VPN tunnel with the configuration, there are a couple of very interesting configurations that we can use. For example, the app command allows configuration to consist of a specific command that will be executed once the TUN or tab devices are open. So once the OpenVPN instance is started and it tries to configure the TUN and tab virtual network interfaces, if the configuration that the OpenVPN started upon contains the app command, it will execute this command after starting the TUN or tab device. So let's see a quick example. As you can see here, we have on the right side of the screen, we have a very simple OpenVPN configuration. And as you can see here, we have the app directive, and this app directive forces OpenVPN to execute this command after it's opened the tab devices. So we can see here the OpenVPN started. As you can see here, the OpenVPN started with this configuration, and once the tab device was opened, the app directive executed this command, and we have popped a calculator. So I hope you understand where we're going with this, but this is a local configuration. Can we do something remotely? So the answer is most definitely yes. If we're using a UNC path, we can place our malicious configuration somewhere in the internet and then open SMB2 server. So we can use, for example, Impacket with Python to create a new SMB server instance, which will once it will receive a request for a specific file, it will return this file. So for example, if we're hosting a malicious OpenVPN configuration, and we will start the OpenVPN tunnel with this configuration, the configuration will be pulled from our remote SMB server, and so our entire attack can be executed remotely. So that's the base of our attack and all the different parts in the exploit. And now we will see a couple of examples of vendors that implemented the entire chain and the entire architecture with some flows that allowed us to exploit them. So let's start with Perfect OpenVPN client. So we have here SSRF to one-click remote code execution. Let's start. So Perfect is a software company that develops professional IT solutions mostly for the industrial world, and we encountered it in one of our customers. That's why we started to research it. And the OpenVPN client, Perfect OpenVPN client, is essentially what the users see is just a very simple GUI, the front end in our diagram, in our architecture, that allows users to start OpenVPN instance using OpenVPN configuration. So it has a nice logo but behind the scene it uses OpenVPN. And when we started to research, we saw that we have a front-end application, just like you saw before, and we have a service. So here you can see the Perfect OpenVPN service. And this backend service is a Windows service. So you can see here it runs with the system privileges. This is high privileges. And when the front-end application starts, sends command to the service backend to start the VPN chain, the backend service will start the OpenVPN instance with the configuration received from the front end from the user. So this is the backend service. It runs with high privileges the system, and we wanted to exploit it. So we saw that the backend service can receive a couple of commands. So it can receive status, it can receive command with a config with a path, close and by. And we were very interested with the config because the config receives a path to an OpenVPN configuration, and it will start the entire OpenVPN chain based on that configuration. So the entire diagram looks like this. We have the front-end application, this time with the logo of Perfect, and the front-end application connects to the backend service using TCP port 10700, and it sends to the backend service the config with the actual OpenVPN config, which will then start the OpenVPN instance, and the OpenVPN instance will listen on TCP port 10600, and it will wait for commands from the backend service, which will tell it, take this configuration received from the user and execute it or start the tunnel using this configuration. So our goal obviously was to inject the payload over here. So our goal was to force this user to open a web page in our control and inject HTTP request to the backend service. So let's go over the different steps that we needed in order to exploit this. So first of all, we needed to prepare a malicious OpenVPN config with the app directive. Then we needed to prepare remote SMB share with anonymous access enabled, so everyone could actually pull data from this server, SMB server. Then we needed to prepare a malicious website with a JavaScript payload, and this JavaScript payload would obviously send a fetch request or send a post request, HTTP request, to the backend service. And finally, lure a factory engineer, in our case Rachel, into our website, and then we have a one-click RCE. So let's see all the different steps. Let's start with number one, preparing a malicious OpenVPN config. So this is how we prepared our config. Basically what we have here is a very simple config with this command. And this command, what it does is starting a reverse shell. So we can see here the app directive here in the bottom. On line 26, you can see the app directive with all for command. We needed to do some cool kind of magic in here because our reverse shell was kind of big. So we needed to break it down and encode it. And once we did that, we had app directive, which starts a reverse shell to our IP, to the attacker's IP. So this is the malicious OpenVPN we configured. We hosted it on a remote server using a SMB server. So it was a server that we started with in Packet using Python, and we specifically asked for anonymous access to be enabled on it. And so anyone can access it and ask for the OpenVPN configuration. Step 3 was to prepare the malicious JavaScript. So we prepared here a JavaScript that fetches HTTP request using a post method, and the body of this request was config according to the vendor perfect protocol. So config, and then the configuration OpenVPN configuration file that we hosted on our controlled remote server, the SMB server. And finally, we lured Rachel to click into our website. We know that Rachel loves cats, and that's why we sent her an image that once she clicks on the cat, she goes onto our website. And let's see how it works. So once Rachel clicked on the cat, our netcat received a new connection with a system privileges remote shell. So let's see a demo. We have your perfect, and then Rachel goes onto our website, and then stuff are starting to run, and we get our shell here because of the injection to the backend service, which started OpenVPN instance with our malicious configuration. And now we have a logo. We pwned the perfect OpenVPN, not because OpenVPN has some issues, but because the management interface was implemented wrong. And we'll discuss what can be done better in the end. Next, we had Siemens Cinema Remote Connect, which again, we were able to get a SSRF to one-click RC on it. So Siemens, you all know Siemens, it's a very huge corporate. It has a Cinema Remote Connect, which is a management platform for remote networks, specifically to manage remote networks on site with PLCs belonging to Siemens. And we started to look on this platform a couple of months ago, and again we discovered the same design, the same architecture. The only difference is the logo here, and obviously the TCP port was changed a bit. So now it's 14,000, and here it's different as well. But all in all, it's the same. We have a front-end application, we have a back-end service with high privileges, and we have the OpenVPN instance, which runs after the back-end service starts the instance. So yes, it looks familiar. And again, we've prepared a POC just like before. We prepared a malicious JavaScript. This time, take a look, we used not config, but we used a different keyword. And this time Siemens had a kind of a different protocol that was expected on the backend, and that's why we used load and not config. But all in all, it's very the same. We're just shooting HTTP post request to localhost on 14,000 locally through a web browser, and finally we're getting a reverse shell with it. So let's see a demo. We can see here a quick demo as well. We can see here the attacker window waiting for a reverse shell. We can see here Cinema RC client waiting to be exploited, and we can see here that the service is running as a system, and we will see in shortly that Rachel is trying to reach our POC website. We wait a bit, and now Rachel reached our Claroty RC POC, and now we have a new reverse shell, of course, with system privileges. Yes, so now we have both Perfect exploited and Siemens remote client exploited. Next, we had HMS E1 eCatcher, which again, it's very similar. This time, we are talking about HMS Networks. This is a large-scale company, international company in the field of industrial communication again, and it has a product line named E1, which is a brand of HMS, and basically its entire platform for a VPN connectivity, so remote connectivity. So you can use these devices and the Talk2M cloud to allow remote connectivity. So in this case, you have both the cloud platform and you have the appliance as well. And Talk2M is just the main server, the cloud server. And what connects to this cloud service is a program, the client named eCatcher. So again, we're focusing on clients, VPN clients. So we started to research eCatcher. And what we discover is basically like previously, we had a backend listening locally on this time port 445. It's a service, Windows service named the Talk2M VPN service, very indicative. And we can see here a bunch of functions or commands that this service is waiting for. And once it receives one of these commands, it will execute it. What we found a bug in one of the printing debug logs functions. We found that if we enter a big enough command, a stack buffer overflow will occur. So if we send a large AAAAAA, then buffer overflow will take place, and we could crash the program. So what we did here is, again, we used HTTP to a HTTP request to send a very large request with a great amount of bytes in the URL. And as you can see here, this is what the function received, a get with a huge URL. And since we had the stack buffer overflow, we overflowed the entire stack with the URL data. So now all we needed to do is send our victim an email or HTML page with an image tag, something like this. Because all we needed is a very long URL that once the backend service will get this URL, it will try to do some stuff with it in the debug log, and it will wrongly copy and overflow some data on the stack. So what was our plan here was to abuse a mechanism named SEH, S-E-H, safe exception handlers. And we will not get into the details of SEH handlers in this presentation, but all I want to say is there is a SEH handler, which is a pointer on the stack, and our goal was to overflow it with our data. So our goal was to do something like this. Send a very large request with a long URL, and because of the stack buffer overflow, we would overflow this pointer, and eventually we'll achieve code execution. So this is how we prepared our payload. As you can see here, we have HTML page with iframe source and a very, very, very long URL, and we carefully prepared this request, so only these 4 bytes will get to the specific location on the stack. So we carefully built this payload, so only these 4 bytes will be placed in a very exact place in the memory on the stack, and eventually through this image being presented on HTML or email, we got control on the EIP, and we could steal execution from the programming control the execution. So we had RCE just from an email being opened on the machine with eCatcher client. So now we have 3 logos on Rachel's computer that we can completely take control. The last one is MB Connect, which was local privilege escalation. This was not one-click remote code execution. So MB Connect Line is a company that again develops VPN services, secure end-to-end connection for when you need one. This is their logo. So MB Dial-Up is again a company in the industrial automation world, and they produce and manufacture different appliances, different systems, and they have their own VPN cloud again. So we started to research again the client MB Dial-Up launcher, and we quickly found out that it supports again the same design all over the place. The backend service supports different commands, for example exit, who, time, version, etc. And this time the Windows service or the backend service was called MB Connect 24 Serve, and it listens locally on 7800. Now we're already familiar with this type of design, so we immediately started to exploit this, and we found the 2 vulnerabilities. And so, for example, here what we used command injection. So it expects, the backend service expects to a legitimate command, for example, route. But since it runs this command through a system shell, we could have injected some more special characters, for example, pipe, and then we issued our own command. So this is an OS command injection being injected into a legitimate command, and if eventually we had a local privilege escalation because this backend service is running as a service with system privileges. So we had LP here too. And now we have 4 logos. Finally, we exploited all the four applications, VPN clients applications, different vendors across all the industrial control system domain, and we have reached our summary. So just to conclude here, the problem is not with OpenVPN. OpenVPN is a good boy. VPN is not the problem here. The issue is with the vendors' implementations, because they have started a backend service which waits for commands. It does not properly verifies or sanitize the input, and so we can control in a different ways, whether it's through injection because the backend service was kind of a loose and ignored different commands that it did not care about, or because we had a command injection, or because we exploited a memory corruption. In this case, it was a stack buffer overflow. But all in all, we were able to achieve SSRF to one-click remote code execution with system privileges, or at least local privilege execution as system. But the main point here is OpenVPN is not the problem. The issue is with the vendor's implementation. And once we disclosed all these CVEs to the different vendors, we obviously worked with them to remediate and solve these issues, and they all released patches and mitigations for the users. The last thing I want to discuss is recommendations. So we have a couple of recommendations for the different vendors or any other remote access solutions implementing OpenVPN, and specifically the management interface feature. So first of all, you can use dynamic parameters. For example, you don't have to listen always on 127.0.0.1. You can use the entire localhost range, for example, 127.123. You can use security tokens, so something similar to CSRF. So if the backend service received the command without a specific token, it will not execute this command. They can also add to the OpenVPN a policy enforcement to not use the app command. So you can read the manual, but To save you some time, you should look for script security and set it to level 1, which will not allow any arbitrary script to be running with the directive up in the configuration. And you should limit the potential attack surface and refrain from executing OpenVPN with the system privileges whenever possible. So these are the recommendations, and was our research. Thank you very much, everyone, and I hope you'll have a nice day.
We will start the Q&A session right now. And yeah, it normally takes a couple of minutes for the audience to catch up and type in all the questions they have. I will check Zoom Q&A section now. Not yet. Anything? Not. The questions are not yet here, but I see that, yeah, the support team is typing something into the master script. So the first question I'll have for myself, I guess. So I have very different experience with OpenVPN as a very, like, you know, general purpose pen tester, I would say. So without all this deep propeller head techie stuff related to OT, IoT, SCADA, ICS, and so on. So I just wanted to catch up with you. How different is it, and how hard is it? How harder is it? How much harder is it when you are dealing with different second factor implementations for OpenVPN? Does it protect at all, or it's just a fancy addition that just demands a little more time to circumvent?
Yeah, so what's important to say is OpenVPN is not the issue here. OpenVPN has done a great job in creating a great architecture of client, server, and protocol. So OpenVPN is not the issue. They also have OpenVPN have a couple of features that are, again, if you're using them correctly, you're secure. The problem is with vendors that are not probably reading the documentation of OpenVPN and using some of the features in a way that can enable attackers to attack the entire solution. Because what they're doing is they're taking OpenVPN and they're using a couple of features and they're kind of integrating their software with OpenVPN and controlling OpenVPN programmatically. And so they need to follow a very strict documentation, but sometimes they're skipping some of the steps, or they're lacking some of the security checks that they need to do. And so it happens just like I described in the presentation. So attackers can abuse this and exploit clients. Specifically, I'm talking about clients, OpenVPN clients, and exploit OpenVPN clients due to the bad integration.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So, like, network-wise, the protocol, the stack is okay. It's well scrutinized. It's well designed. It has been through a lot, and now it's like a very robust product, I would say. But when you try to bolt on anything else, like a managerial part that will, like, I don't know, authorize client in some separate way, but then establish the OpenVPN tunnel, yeah, it may go wrong just because vendor did not do proper threat management and architecture design. Cool. So I think we have a question in the chat room. What is your opinion about OpenVPN NL, where OpenSSL was swapped for embed TLS?
So I think, again, I think the issue is not with the SSL stack, protocol stack, or the lower layers of the protocol. So I don't see any issue or problematically with using OpenVPN in different flavors that are using MBTLS instead of OpenSSL. I don't think so. Both OpenSSL and MBTLS were gone through a lot of research and a lot of scrutinizing. So they're well defined and well established. And I do think that if you're using these libraries in the correct way, just like OpenVPN is doing, so you have no issues and it's totally fine.
Good. Okay, maybe one more question from me. What do you think about alternative stacks like WireGuard that gains popularity? We will have some plans for native Windows support if I'm not mistaken. Does it catch the bit? Does it see the perspective of similar adoption rates?
So OpenVPN is by far the most popular VPN.
Yeah, apparently. But does any alternative, does any challenger have any chances?
Yeah, so I do think that new players have great chances in becoming the next big thing. Currently, due to the great popularity of OpenVPN, all the major deployments of different software related to remote connect or remote access are 100% based on OpenVPN. So as a vulnerability researching different products, I did not encounter other solutions other than OpenVPN yet, but I do think we'll start seeing this very soon because other solutions, just like you said, WireGuard is gaining some popularity.
Mm-hmm. What do you personally use for VPN access? Privacy reasons.
So
is
what
it
is
OpenVPN?
So I'm using OpenVPN with a modified server.
Modified server, but
anyway,
it's not like OpenVPN AS or something. It's your homebrewed server.
Kind of, it's based on OpenVPN, but yes.
Okay. So, do we have any more questions, guys? Nothing yet. Okay, then I think then that's it. I don't know, maybe the last one from me. How does it feel, like in general? Oh, that's not that's not the question. How does it feel to hold the black badge for DEFCON?
Feels great, yeah. Feels
Yeah?
great, and I can attend any DEFCON that I want for free. So definitely great.
Cool. Congratulations on that. That's quite an impressive achievement in and by itself, besides all the other cool stuff you do. Okay, then, thank you again for your great talk, for all the research you're doing, for all the knowledge that you've shared. And we just hope that everyone who missed it in these hours will be able to watch it on online on our YouTube channel and get back to you and ask you questions.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Bye-bye.